Good morning. Before reciting Havdallah on the cup of wine at home, we recite Havdallah in the Tefillah of Mariv at the conclusion of Shabbos. The Gemara in Brachos on Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph discusses different insertions within the text of the Shemona Esrei, one of which the Mishnah writes is Havdallah b'chonin hada'as, that the bracha of Havdallah, the Tefillah for Havdallah, is recited in the bracha of chonin hada'as, in the fourth bracha of Shemona Esrei about the topic of knowledge. However, Rabbi Akiva actually argues that you say it as its own independent bracha, not just as an insertion. And finally, Rabbi Eliezer says it behoda'ah, that it should be recited in the bracha of Modim. The consensus is that we hold, like the Tanakama, the first opinion, that it is simply an insertion within the bracha of Atachonin. And the Gemara gives two reasons why we would do this, why we insert it at this point in Shemona Esrei. The first reason given is that Havdallah is that understanding the difference between Kodesh and Chol requires das, requires knowledge, and therefore it's appropriate to insert it in the bracha of knowledge. The second opinion is that because the bracha of Atachonen is the first bracha, which is a bracha of Chol. It's the first bracha which we do not recite on Shabbos, that we recite uniquely b'Chol on a weekday. And therefore, once we come up against the Tefillah, which is unique to a weekday, it is appropriate at that point to insert the Tefillah of Havdallah at that point. While this Havdallah is required, the Gemara makes very clear that even one who recites the Havdallah in Tefillah, that we still have an obligation to go home and recite Havdallah on a cup of wine and the rest of the process, as we will talk about at a later point. Now, the Mishnah Berurah does point out that perhaps, according to those like the Rambam and others who we said previously hold that Havdallah is mideoraisa, once you recite Havdallah in Tefillah, perhaps it drops the level of chiyuv, of obligation of Havdallah at home over a cup of wine to a midirabanan, to a rabbinic obligation. While this Havdallah in Tefillah does allow one to perform melacha afterwards, one still may not eat until they have made the bracha of Havdallah on a kos, on the cup of wine. If for some reason one happened to make Havdallah on a cup of wine and the formal Havdallah prior to reciting Mariv, which should ideally be avoided, but if that does happen, then one still would include the Havdallah in Tefillah. One final point on this matter is that if one did not, for some reason, recite Atachon Antanu de Havdallah in Tefillah, then they may not do Melacha until we say the line of Baruch Hamadu ben Kodesh L'chol. Once we recite the Atachon Antanu within Tefillah, one can perform Melacha, but must wait to eat until the Havdallah al Hakos. However, if one forgot Atachon Antanu, while they do not have to repeat Shemona Esrei, they do have to make sure to recite the line of Baruch Hamadu ben Kodesh L'chol prior to performing any Melacha. Have a great Shabbos.